Hello, U.S. History students, and welcome to Lesson 1.2 of the Gilded Age unit. Today we are going to talk about populism. As the 19th century nears an end, many issues arise, especially in the farming industry. If we look at our chart that we have here, beginning in 1870, wheat is about $106 a bushel, corn is about $43, and cotton is about $15 per pound. But as we move through the Gilded Age and into the latter part of the 19th century, starting in 1894, we see wheat is down to $63, corn at $29, and cotton is down to $5.8 per pound. That is a dramatic drop. This chart gives us a little bit of a understanding of how farmers are doing as far as their business goes. The blue represents farmers receiving better prices for their products than they pay for their purchases. And the red represents farmers paying more for their purchases than they receive for their products. As you can see, in about 1885, we see a pretty long span where farmers are paying out more money than they are receiving for the products that they're selling. This leads to the beginning of the push for the government regulation that we will see expand into the Progressive era, which is our next unit that we will look at. And we're going to look real quick at this quote from John Hicks and his book, The Populist Revolt. The book was written in 1931. As one hard season succeeded another, the empty-handed farmer found his back debts and unpaid interest to the bank becoming an intolerable burden. In the West, interest rates from the banks of 7 or 8% on real estate were now regarded as extremely low. 10 to 12% was considered very liberal. From 18 to 24% was not uncommon, and 40% or above was not unknown. Naturally, the number of real estate mortgages placed dropped off precipitately. That gives you kind of a picture of what these farmers are dealing with in this era. In this era, crop prices begin to fall because of overproduction by farmers, which means they are planting more crops than they can sell. They're producing too many crops. We also see banks charging higher interest rates on mortgage, and when the people can't pay their mortgages, the banks will then foreclose on their farms or take their farms away. And then railroads charge higher rates for shipping crops. At this point, railroads are used to ship crops all over the country. We're expanding. But the farmers are having to pay higher rates to send those crops to the other areas, and this is putting more stress on them financially. The origins of this go back to the Civil War era. During that time, the government prints a lot of paper money, known as greenbacks. This surplus money leads to inflation, which is just the price of goods. So the price of things begins to rise. Because of this, the government stops relying on paper money. They decide it's not really working out as they had planned, and they return to the gold standard. The gold standard is when gold backs the value of money, meaning if you have $1, that dollar is backed by the equivalent of $1 of gold. As a result of this, the U.S. experiences a deflation, which lowers prices, which you might think sounds really good, lower prices. However, the lower prices mean that farmers might not be able to pay their debts back because now they're getting even less money for their goods than they were before. This leads to many farmers facing financial ruin. All of these issues convince Western farmers to organize. Groups such as the Grangers and the Farmers Alliance demand government regulation of railroads and banks and the formation of co-op stores, banks, and silos. Unfortunately, the efforts of these groups fail to improve the lives of farmers, but lead to some better things as we move forward. By 1890, Western farmers decide to form a new political party. This is going to be called the Populist Party, and they want to do this to bring about reform or change. The party demands an end to pro-business laissez-faire policies and begin to regulate railroads to force them to lower rates on farmers. Now let's go back to laissez-faire. This might be a term that you've not yet seen. This means that it's a lack of government involvement in the economy. The easiest way to remember this term is by thinking lazy government. Kind of as if the government was too lazy to regulate business and the economy, and they're okay with letting things just do whatever. The populists want regulation, and they want reform. And they want that reform by creating a national income tax to take the tax burden off of farmers and help their financial situation. They also call for an amendment that's going to allow citizens, as opposed to legislators, directly elect senators. This is going to hold those senators more accountable to the people that they're representing, also known as their constituents. Another demand that populists make is bimetallism. This means that they wanted money to be backed by both gold and silver in order to inflate the money supply. Now, this chart here is going to give us a better understanding of the two sides of the argument. The gold bugs are your bankers and your businessmen. People like William McKinley that we're going to see here in a couple minutes. They want the gold standard. The gold standard is going to allow for less money to be in circulation, and they want this because loans would be repaid with stable gold-backed money. The effects of this are deflation. Prices are going to fall. The value of money is going to increase. However, fewer people are going to have money. So that means that fewer people are going to have money to put back into the economy. The other side of this argument are the silverites. These are your populists. They are the farmers and the laborers. They advocate for bimetallism, which is going to allow for more money in circulation. They want this because products can be sold at higher prices, which would then allow for farmers to make a better profit because they're about helping the farmers. The effects of this are going to be inflation. Prices are going to go up. The value of money is going to decrease. However, more people are going to have money in their pockets to spend, and they see that as a good thing. From 1890 to 1896, the Populist Party becomes very influential as a third party, and they challenge the Democratic and Republican parties. And that's really what a third party does, is they challenge the normal parties or your common parties like the Democrats and the Republicans. In that 6-year time span, many state and federal candidates were elected under the Populist Party, including governors, congressmen, and senators. And then in 1892, we see our first Populist Party presidential candidate. His name is John Weaver, and he runs for president but loses to Grover Cleveland by a pretty substantial margin. By 1896, the populists start to gain traction because bimetallism becomes one of the most important issues of the election. In this election, we see two sides. We've got the Republican William McKinley. He's very much your gold bug from our previous chart that we looked at. He supports the gold standard. Then you've got the populist candidate, William Jennings Bryan, and he supports the bimetallist or the silverite column that we looked at on that chart. During this election, William Jennings Bryan, who is a pretty charismatic, good speaker, gives this dramatic speech that we've come to call the Cross of Gold speech. And in that speech, he explains the disastrous effects of the gold standard on the working class in America. And we're going to just look at a small excerpt from this speech. Having behind us the producing masses of this nation and the world, supported by the commercial interests, the laboring interests, and the toilers everywhere, we will answer their demand for a gold standard by saying to them, "You shall not press down upon the brow of labor this crown of thorns. You shall not crucify mankind upon a cross of gold." This is William Jennings Bryan at the Democratic Convention in Chicago on July 8th of 1896. As you can see, he's very passionate and very charismatic, and he's very passionate about this topic. Despite the support among farmers in the West, unfortunately for Bryan, McKinley does win the election. As President McKinley goes into his first term, he returns to the gold standard and he kills the bimetallism movement. The Populist Party dies out after the 1896 election, but several things that they advocated for do come to play. In the Progressive era, which is an era of reform and change and fixing the issues of the Gilded Age, we do see the income tax, direct election of senators, and regulation of railroads enacted. And this is going to be a very good thing as we look at reforming the problems that we see in the Gilded Age. This is going to end Lesson 1.2. See you back here later for Lesson 1.3, and I hope you guys have a wonderful day.